Whew, welcome back. Boy, it's hard to pursue creative passions and make real progress with them when you also have a full-time job. I wonder if anyone else has ever noticed that. Sorry. Bad joke. Really depressing joke. I'd like to thank my subscribers here on the TAPAS YouTube channel. I have 8 at the moment. Well, 6. 1 is me, 2 are Mackenzie. But my 6 subscribers, Mackenzie Eby, Stacy Lord, Christine Kelly, Gretchen Wolfmeyer, my mom, and of course Natalie Yenfjord, my dear fiance. I have no evidence that any of them have listened to the podcast in several weeks, so if you're there, please give me evidence. It's been really depressing not hearing from any of you, common stuff. We are at Act 2, Scene 4 of Drizzt and the Companions of the Dance Hall. The companions arrive in Kalimport. Yes, they get there in Scene 4. I kind of skipped past the bulk of the Halflings gem, just the Kalimport stuff. Wolfgar is shocked by the size of the big city, and as the scope of their quest starts to hit them, he goes into a song. It's not really a song, per se, more of a beat poetry jam, and it's called... sorry, it's early. It's called, appropriately, Beat 'em Up Poetry. 2 extras provide him with a microphone on a stand, a beret, sunglasses, and a soul patch. And it goes, "Hey, I'm a barbarian of the tribe of the elk, and I understand things like rights of challenge and rebelling against the man, and I'm so used to being the biggest, baddest brute who could defeat any challenge that faced me with my glutes. Groovy." Yeah, there's more. Don't want to spoil it, but it's awesome. Some of the verses are haikus. It's great. Entreri and Jarlaxle appear right away, holding Regis captive, and our heroes discover that it's Irenicus who is behind it all. Irenicus orders all the companions thrown in a cell, and decides to throw Entreri and Jarlaxle in there too, as their usefulness has ended. The scene ends with Irenicus writing in his journal, because, well, the hero and the villain have to be foils to each other somehow, and it is canon that both Drizzt and Irenicus keep a journal. Team Salmon segment. Salmon! Well, I wrote that Eye of Argon screenplay. It's quite short. And I'm thinking, nah, let's not do the thing where we expand it into a feature film. Let's just make it a short film, totally faithful to the book. It's quite amazing. Without the horrible prose, the dialogue is actually not that bad. And in places where the dialogue is bad, I tweaked it a bit. So this might actually be a pretty good barbarian fantasy short film. I discovered a YouTube channel recently, one that's posted only 8 videos in the past 7 years, but it's quite good. The channel is called Morgan King, and the channel runner, Morgan Galen King, calls himself Gorgonaut, and he does rotoscoped fantasy animation in the style of, well, exactly the rotoscoped fantasy epics I'm trying to emulate / parody with my Eye of Argon thing. Gorgonaut's first 2 videos start a character named Mongrel, and I'm sad that he never revisited that character, because it was actually some pretty interesting stuff. I wanted to know how the rest of that story went. His next video was a trailer for his next project, and his 4th was the project called Exordium, an 8-minute short film that's just an incredibly profound piece of violent and gritty fantasy. I loved it. And the other 4 videos on the channel are related to The Spine of Night, a feature film he's making, which has been in production for at least 3 years now. He says he's making daily progress with it. As you might imagine, it's incredibly difficult for one man to animate an entire feature film. Apparently, all of his projects take place in the same universe. But I'm thinking, once The Spine of Night is finished, I might approach Morgan Galen King about working with us on The Eye of Argon, since he has that exact style I'm going for with it. This podcast is kind of lopsided, isn't it? The first 2 segments are just incredibly short, and then the next 2 segments go on forever. Not really how I planned it, but, well, in the companion segment, I talk about only a single scene, and then I'm pretty much completely out of things to talk about in the Team Salmon segment. I've told you all of my ideas, and there's very little progress week by week to focus on. I do have a big speech prepared for whenever Stacy finishes drawing the last 5 Iris characters, but until then, yeah, not much to say in segment number 2 anymore. And then in the Droon segment, I synopsize an entire book. In the K&K segment, I summarize an entire movie, or more than one movie, so yeah, lopsided. So let's talk about the next Droon book. Special Edition number 1, The Magic Escapes. Awesome installment. Illustrated by Tim Jessel as usual, and on the back cover, I haven't mentioned this yet, but the back cover of every normal Droon book reads, "A hidden door, a magical staircase, discover the world of Droon," and then a little synopsis of the book. The special editions have their own unique messages above the synopsis. This one says, "A jeweled door, a dark staircase. The magic of Droon is not a secret anymore." Chapter 1, The Time Before. The book opens with a flashback to Eric, Julie, and Neil hanging out in the apple tree in Eric's yard, and Eric's mom calls them in for pie. Back in the present, we return on Eric pursuing Spar up the dark stair. Passing through the door, Eric and Spar find themselves in a bejeweled city where they are immediately assaulted by goblins riding flying carpets. Eric is cornered by the goblins, but Spar rescues him and pulls him into an alleyway. Chapter 2, New Foes, New Friends. Eric recognizes the constellations in the stars above, which must mean that somehow, despite appearances, this is the upper world. It takes him a moment to realize how weird it is that he's having a conversation with Lord Spar. Spar helps Eric evade the goblins by hiding in the sewers, and Spar pulls out 2 tiny gems he identifies as the eyes of the coiled viper. The viper is what he's searching for in the upper world, and he gives one of the eyes to Eric for safekeeping, which confuses the heck out of Eric. Spar leaves, telling Eric to be careful. Eric examines the eye of the coiled viper before the goblins find him again. Chapter 3, Adventure in the Night. Eric evades the goblins for a while, but there are so many of them all over the city that soon they overwhelm him and succeed at taking the wand. But someone comes to his rescue before the goblins can do him any real harm, a man in a blue cape and blue boots. The stranger explains that they are in the goblin city of Pesh, which appeared out of nowhere a year ago, ruled by Princess Salamandra, who collects magic and people. He advised Eric to meet him at the Dirty Plate Inn at midnight before running off to shake the goblins off of Eric's tail. Chapter 4, The Princess and the Pie. Julie, Neil, and Kia catch up to Eric. Eric tells them about all he's learned about their current location, but finds himself physically unable to tell them that Spar gave him the eye of the coiled viper, or that the viper is Spar's reason for being in the upper world. Realizing Spar put a curse on him that causes him intense physical pain every time he tries to reveal these details. Soon, the kids witness a parade in honor of Princess Salamandra, a purple-skinned humanoid with yellow cat-like eyes and tangles of thorns for hair. Behind her march the same procession of hooded figures that the kids saw on their street the first time Eric used the wand. Then they meet Salamandra's royal pie maker, Jabbo, a squat, brown, human-sized dragon wearing a chef's uniform, Neil taking one of his offered pies before the dragon has to rush off to Salamandra's fortress to cater a celebration. Eric fights through Spar's curse enough to tell them that Spar is hoping to team up with Salamandra. They make their way to the Dirty Plate to meet with the stranger. Chapter 5, A Trick of Time. The Dirty Plate seems to be a rough bar where elderly goblins gorge themselves on Jabbo's pies. Their entrance causes a big scene, but Kia casts a spell that makes the goblins decide to ignore them and eat some more pie. They go to the top floor and find the stranger's room. There, they find the stranger's possessions and realize that they truly are in the upper world, in the year 1470. Ko built the Dark Stair 530 years ago, and so the stair leads to the upper world 530 years ago, which clearly Spar didn't expect. The stranger returns, having stolen the Wand of Uruk back from the goblins. Chapter 6, Names to Conjure With. Eric tries to take the Wand of Uruk, but it keeps zooming back into the hand of the stranger, who claims he lost it in a battle the previous day. They put the pieces together. The stranger is Uruk, a member of a prestigious family of wizards. As they converse with Uruk, more bombshells are dropped. Uruk has never heard of Droon. Galen is Uruk's little brother. And their mother? None other than Zara, the Queen of Light, whom they already know to be the mother of Lord Spar. Tim chose to illustrate this chapter with a family portrait of Zara and her 3 sons, which is cute, although he depicts baby Spar with the fins behind his ears. That's not canon. It's been established by now that Spar developed those fins through his dark magic stuff. He didn't have them as a baby. Makes for a nice visual, though. Realizing they're at the spot in the timeline just after Ko abducted Zara and the baby Spar, they explain everything to Uruk, leaving him in tears. Uruk further explains that Salamandra, the princess of Shadowthorn, appeared a year ago, claiming to be the princess of the long-extinct Shadowthorn Empire, and has spent that year stealing all the magic from the upper world. Max has managed to track down the kids, and recognizes Uruk as Galen's brother. He has lost track of present-day Galen, while past Galen is believed to be trapped in Salamandra's fortress. Whew, that's a lot of information for one chapter. This is the halfway point. As I said before, special edition titles have 12 chapters instead of 10. It's crazy. Chapter 7, Dangerous Waters. At the docks, Uruk finds an elderly boat captain who can take them across the water to Salamandra's fortress. The boatman warns them of a kraken in these waters. Unusual of Droon to include a creature from real mythology, but then again, this book is set in the upper world, although it doesn't resemble any mythical kraken I've ever seen, more like this thing. A sea serpent with 2 toothy maws. Oh, Tony, what were you smoking? Regardless, there's an epic kraken battle, the beast throwing the boat around. Max and the children are thrown out, leaving Uruk and the boatman to battle the kraken. Uruk encouraging them to go find Galen and stop Spar. Chapter 8, Searching for No-Beard. Eric is drowning, and his magic has been acting screwy ever since he started carrying the Eye of the Coiled Viper. Spar telepathically urges him to use the eye's power, but Eric refuses and just swims to the surface through sheer muscle. They find a secret passage into Salamandra's lair. When they find Galen No-Beard, it seems he's escaped captivity on his own and is interrogating a goblin. Eric once again musters the heroic willpower to ignore his curse and reveal that Spar is looking for the Coiled Viper. He thinks Spar has failed since he came to the upper world in the wrong time period and is stuck here, but Galen knows something about Salamandra that may prove him wrong. Chapter 9, What's Under the Fortress. As they travel to the center of the fortress, Galen reveals that Pesh was one of the first cities on Earth, and that Salamandra uses her magic to bring her city forward in time, and spend a year stealing all the magic on Earth before traveling forward again and repeating the process. This, therefore, is why there's no magic in the upper world in our hero's time. And Spar, therefore, can use Salamandra's time machine to go exactly where and when he needs to go to find the Viper. Galen and Max jump inside the time machine to break it down, leaving our 4 heroes to find Spar. While trying to figure out how to get past the goblins, Neil, who has been having digestive issues since eating Jabbo's pie, transforms into a goblin. Chapter 10, A Riddle Among Riddles. With Neil in the form of a goblin, they easily get into Salamandra's throne room and find Spar himself sitting on the princess's throne, making plans with Salamandra. It seems at first they've struck a deal, but soon it becomes clear that Salamandra is holding Spar prisoner and trying to force her way into his mind so she can take the Viper for herself. Eric finally manages to reveal that he has the Viper's eye, freeing himself from Spar's curse. Salamandra discovers the Viper's location in space and time and opens up her time portal, revealing flashes of various periods in Earth's history, finally setting a destination: Eric's house. Chapter 11, Winds of Time. Eric realizes that in order to stop Salamandra from bringing Pesh to his own hometown, they'll have to rescue Spar and all fight Salamandra together. Julie and Neil start a ruckus by throwing Jabbo's pies around. There's a big action scene that's part pie fight, part magical duel. Classic Droon. Kia and Eric free Spar, and the 3 of them do an awesome combination attack against Salamandra. Eric refuses to give the eye back to Spar, and Spar shrugs that off and jumps through the time portal. Max, Uruk, and young Galen turn up at this point, revealing that they wrecked the time machine, destabilizing the portal, and that therefore Spar will be lost in time rather than reaching his destination. Uruk decides to follow Spar, hoping to reach out for whatever shred of their mother's goodness remains in him. Eric uses the Wand of Uruk to defeat Salamandra, but that uses up the last of the wand's energy, turning it back into a stick. Salamandra, now having knowledge of Droon, decides to conquer it instead of Earth. The group then have to flee Pesh before it shifts back to its own time. Eric drops the eye there, and Julie urges him not to go back for it. Chapter 12, New Friends, New Foes. I see. He turned it around. Parallel chapter titles. Nice. Salamandra takes her magic speedboat and heads for the door that leads to the Dark Stair. The boatman helps them pursue her, revealing himself to be the present-day Galen. They are unable to stop Salamandra from passing through the door to Droon. Galen instructs his younger self to create the rainbow stairs to create the more traditional path to Droon. Eric gives him the Wand of Uruk, which is recharged, as well as Uruk's map, which will lead him to the valley in America where he will create the stairs. Finally, Galen turns his little boat into a massive sailing ship. As they head for the door to the Dark Stair, they find that Jabbo has also passed through the door, having found the Eye of the Viper, and also intends to take over Droon. Kia and Galen seal the Dark Stair's door so that no one can ever find it again, and the party return to Silver Snow. The present-day rainbow stairs appear, Neil is turned back into a human, and our heroes depart, knowing they'll have to face Salamandra and Jabbo in the future, and wondering if they'll ever see Spar again. Oh boy, this book definitely earns the special edition distinction. It's just so... it's good, okay? I love this series. In my updated version of my adaptation, special edition number 1 serves as the Season 2 finale. Casting-wise, in this book, we have 3 new characters. Uruk should be played by me. Remember how I cast myself as both Spar and the younger Galen, and thought the same kid should play Galen No-Beard and Kid Spar? Well, here's the reason why. The book reveals that the trio are brothers. I'm pretty sure there's no scene in the series where 2 of them would appear together, played by the same actor, so it works perfectly. As elderly men, I picture them played by 3 different actors. More on that when we see elderly Spar and elderly Uruk. For my portrayal of Uruk, I think I would go with the mannerisms of a young William Shatner. For Princess Salamandra, I want to cast Natalie Yenfjord, my fiancée. I like my Salamandra played with far more subtlety than the hammy villain of the books, and of course with a thick and adorable Swedish accent. Jabbo, in my live-action plan, would have been a rubber suit performer with an animatronic face, naturally, and his voice actor, in any case, one of the first decisions I ever made about my fantasy adaptation, has to be Weird Al Yankovic. He's gotten really into voice acting lately, hasn't he, just in the past couple years? Well, I wanted him to do voice work in my show before that was cool. And the Boatman, as he's revealed to be Galen in disguise, should just be played or voiced by Galen's actor, as the disguise appears to be largely non-magical. Okay, and now, having reached the end of Season 2, it's time to recap all the guest stars of that season. Same rules as last week apply. I'm now picturing a Rooster Teeth animated series, and any guest star who we might be unable to get for such a thing will instead audition Rooster Teeth employees and local voice actors. Much longer list of guest stars in Season 2 than in Season 1. As follows: Macaulay Culkin as Mr. Kroger, Conchata Farrell as the Nin Mother, Clancy Brown as the fake Grindel, Asif Mandvi as Friddle, Gilbert Gottfried as the real Grindel, my mom as Mrs. Michaels, Zachary Levi as Turok, Patrick Warburton as Slag, Cam Clark as Ichthos, Jonathan Frakes as Ving, me as Galen Shortbeard, Jess Harnell as Snorky, Charlie Adler as Am, Andrea Libman as a Firefrog, Melissa Disney as Sarla and Luma, Greg Proops as Hob, Tim Curry as Prince Malaban, Brian George as Yoho, Bill Fagerbakke as Num, Tony Abbott as Nelag, a young Haley Joel Osment type as Galen No-Beard, Jeff Bennett as the Stone Goblin, Tom Kenny as the Fire Goblin, Kevin Michael Richardson as Hoja, the same young Haley Joel Osment type as Kid Spar, Matthew Lewis as Mr. Rubin, Ming-Na Wen as Hagen number 1, Tress McNeil as Hagen number 2, Laurie Allen as Hagen number 3, Ty Burrell as Old Rolf, Ahmed Best as Lunk, Simon Helberg as Smee, Gil Birmingham as the Organ Chief, me again as Uruk, Weird Al Yankovic as Jabbo, and my dear sweet Natty Pie as Princess Salamandra. So that's it. My Sleeping Beauty DVD arrived this week, so it's time to watch that. and a live-action Disney film of the same year, Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Let's dive right in. 1959's Sleeping Beauty is the 22nd film in my collection, the 16th entry in the Disney animated canon, the third and last of the Walt-era films to produce a Disney princess, and some say the final entry in the Silver Age, though, as I've mentioned, I don't subscribe to that method of dividing the eras. Like Cinderella, I've seen it a bazillion times while babysitting, so I kind of had to force myself to pop in the DVD and pay enough attention to take notes. Disney DVDs open with a message about how it's time for wonder and excitement and how there's only one Disney. Good thing, too. If there were two of them, they'd consume the world. Like Cthulhu, and, does Cthulhu fight anyone? Does he have rivals like Godzilla does? I don't know anything about Lovecraft. All I know is that the default warlock patron in the Keys and Kingdoms universe, it's motherfucking Cthulhu. The movie takes some cues, including musical score, from the Sleeping Beauty ballet by Tchaikovsky, so that's cool. The art direction of the film is inspired by medieval tapestries, most of the backgrounds looking like a medieval tapestry, complete with the fact that pre-Renaissance artists had no idea how to draw perspective. When the world is visited in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, they hold to that, making all the foliage square, which my sisters commented on when we played that game. The Sleeping Beauty herself, Princess Aurora, is voiced by opera singer Mary Costa, who is still alive. She's in her late 80s, and while she's been approached to reprise the role of Aurora, she's never done so. Aurora is the most inconsistently voiced of the Disney princesses. Cinderella is always voiced by legendary voice actress Jennifer Hale, Snow White is usually voiced by Disney staff member Carolyn Gardner, and the others are generally voiced by their original actors from the films, with occasional exceptions, but Aurora's gone through quite a few, including Aaron Torpy, Jennifer Hale performing double princess duty, and Kate Higgins, who seems to have finally been chosen as the official voice. Maleficent is voiced by Eleanor Audley, having been asked to return to Disney for a role specifically written for her after she knocked their socks off in Cinderella. Modern depictions, almost all of them in the Kingdom Hearts series, cast Suzanne Blakesley in the role. She fits quite well. And the three good fairies, Flora is played by Verna Felton in her 5th Disney feature, Merryweather by Barbara Luddy, returning to Disney after having been the lead in Lady and the Tramp, and Fauna by Barbara Jo Allen in one of only 2 Disney films she did. In modern depictions, Fauna and Merryweather are played by voice-acting legends Russi Taylor and Tress MacNeille, respectively, while Flora gets Barbara Derrickson, who has virtually nothing else to her name. Now, of all the Disney princesses, Aurora is probably the one who gets the most flack for being a dull protagonist, but Aurora is not the protagonist. The 3 good fairies are. The film is about their goals and what they'll do to achieve them, and the villain is their nemesis. It's a fairy tale that's all about the fairies. So, a movie with 3 female protagonists who are non-sexualized and have a lot of personality and agency. That's pretty good for today, never mind 1959. Good job, Disney. When King Hubert brings his son Philip to view the baby Aurora, and Philip, not knowing he's destined to marry Aurora to join the 2 kingdoms, kinda wrinkles his nose at her. And all I could think of was, boy, the movie The Swan Princess ripped the fuck off of this moment. The deeds the fairies perform in this movie, the gifts that all 4 of them give Aurora, for good or ill, are not the kind of thing you'd see covered in the rules of an RPG. I had similar thoughts when the Queen was preparing her spells in Snow White. That's definitely got me thinking that, well, just straight up 5th edition D&D is the way I'm approaching the storytelling for the choices. When it comes to the real rules of the Keys and Kingdoms RPG, the open game license is a nice template, but I think I'm going to need to hire a really good game developer to help me make a totally new game from it. That is the point of the open game license. I ought to memorize the 5th edition spell list just to make absolutely sure that this movie can't be replicated by the rules of the game. Maybe it can. Aurora's mother is named Queen Leah, and she's seen very little in the film, having only 2 lines. Disney apparently has no record of who provided her voice, though in my opinion she sounds exactly like Flora, so I would say it's pretty obvious she's played by Verna Felton. And IMDb seems to agree with me, as they attribute the role of Leah to Felton. But keep in mind that for movies where the credits aren't explicit about the cast, anyone can edit a movie's IMDb page with their own theories, and they'll be accepted. The Disney Wiki maintains that no one knows for sure who provided Leah's voice. At the very least, the casting director of Disney Princess Enchanted Tales Follow Your Dreams agreed with me that Leah sounds identical to Flora, as they cast Barbara Derrickson as Leah as well. I like Leah. Yeah, she only has 2 lines, and her design is basically just an older, queenlier Aurora, but hey, everyone has those little obscure characters that appeal to them. Since anyone talking about Disney is obligated to mention it, Leah's presence makes Aurora the first Disney princess to have 2 living parents. Indeed, she's the first to have any living parents, as both Snow White and Cinderella got the mother dies, father remarries, father dies treatment. I'm not gonna succumb to the cliché Disney running gags like making fun of the dead mothers trope. It's been done, and it was subverted as early as Sleeping Beauty, so let it go. The jokes, that is. So early in the film, we get a scene of the 3 good fairies pondering how to save Aurora from the fate Maleficent has bestowed upon her, and it's a great scene, really showing off that these are our heroes, and what they're willing to do to protect what I guess is kind of their godchild, kinda? Some fair folk really are fair. Back to Keys and Kingdoms rules. I assume that what most fairies can do is related to their class. All fairies are technically sorcerers, and most of them progress accordingly. But I figured even if fairies take a low magic class, like a fighter or ranger, I thought I'd come up with a list of various supernatural abilities, and decided a fairy can choose one every time they gain an odd-numbered level, regardless of class. I only came up with 10, so by the time a fairy reaches level 19, they'd have all the fairy abilities. I hope, however, to come up with at least 10 more to make every fairy's fairy abilities unique. So the fairies agree to disguise themselves as humans and keep Aurora safe until the curse's deadline, the sunset of her 16th birthday. Cut to 16 years later, when one of Maleficent's goons, in a lovely cameo by Candy Candido, informs her that they've checked all the cradles but found no trace of the baby Aurora. Maleficent has a wonderful tantrum and sends her loyal raven Diablo to go out to look for a friggin' 16-year-old girl like they were supposed to be all this time. Maleficent's goons are a really interesting assortment of creatures. No 2 of them are alike. Any one of them could probably be labeled a goblin and accepted as such, but perhaps I ought to develop various creatures based on the various goons. Or perhaps there's some artificial being created by Maleficent's magic, which is why they're all so unique. That's a possibility as well. Now, in some versions of the tale, the Sleeping Beauty is named Aurora. In others, she's named Briar Rose. Disney managed to get away with using both names, Aurora as her real name, Briar Rose as her undercover disguise. That's a nice touch, especially as she does basically go undercover in the story. Merchandise-wise, she's a good character because she comes in both pink and blue, or in some merch, purple, if you feel like compromising on the 2 designs the film presents. When Merryweather says the dress Flora is making looks awful, and Flora replies, "That's because it's on you, dear," that's the best line in the film. Flora's got shade. Since Aurora has very little screen time, she has to cram in all the Disney princess tropes into one single scene, giving us the film's only real musical number, the swarm of animal sidekicks, and her dreams of being whisked away from her life, all at once. Not really developed as a character, but like I said, she's not our real hero here. Aurora's operatic singing voice and her purplish eyes are, I think, related to the gifts that Flora and Fauna gave her, the gift of beauty rare and the gift of song. Nice touch. Prince Philip, played by Bill Shirley, hears Aurora's singing and goes to investigate. The animals steal Philip's effects so they can play act being the Prince of Rose's dreams, only for the real Philip to turn up and join Rose in a romantic duet. Meanwhile, at the cabin, the fairies have given up trying to prepare Aurora's birthday by hand, deciding to use their magic to craft a perfect birthday celebration for the last evening they get with her before she has to return home. Again, this handy household magic isn't the kind of thing that usually appears in the text of an RPG, although 5th edition has spells like prestidigitation, thaumaturgy, druidcraft, sort of an all-purpose spells whose use we can maybe expand upon. If they'd waited only a single day to continue to hold off on using their magic, Diablo may have never spotted them. The deadline was sunset on her 16th birthday. They could have had the party the day after just to be safe. Heck, in the next scene, Hubert mentions that sunset is in a half hour. If they'd waited a half hour to return to the castle, they could have completely bypassed Maleficent's curse, but that wouldn't have been much of a movie. We get a scene of Aurora's father, King Stefan, and Philip's father, King Hubert, the latter voiced by Bill Thompson, awaiting Aurora's return, making occasional toasts with the help of an alcoholic minstrel. It's totally filler, but afterward, Philip comes home to tell his father he's met a peasant girl in the woods who he intends to marry, and he's going off to see her tonight. And so he goes over his father's objections, and this is the last moment in the film that either Philip or Aurora speak. Aurora is brought to the castle and is tricked by Maleficent into touching the spindle. Philip is kidnapped by Maleficent, tormented in her dungeon, rescued by the good fairies, fights his way out of Maleficent's castle and past Dragon Maleficent, awakens Aurora, and the two of them return to their fathers, all without either of them uttering a single word. It's a really intriguing creative decision that took me a few viewings to pick up on. I really, really like it. Also, I'd say Aurora, at this point in time, has beaten both of her predecessors as far as relationship development. Snow White's prince just sang to her, Cinderella's just waltzed with her, Aurora and Philip sing together, dance together, and have a conversation, and then they discover that they're actually betrothed anyway, so they have to marry, as well as wanting to, so it works out. Lack of relationship development is another of those stupid running gags. I'm better than that. Maleficent very creepily hypnotizes Aurora into touching a spindle. It's quite an effective scene. Then, as in the original fairy tale, the whole kingdom is put to sleep alongside the princess so they don't have to miss her. As the three good fairies put everyone to sleep, Flora finds out from Hubert that the stranger Aurora met in the woods was actually Philip, so that works out. I do like how the fairies sort of fight and do their thing. They often become very tiny in order to go about their business, and sometimes even travel as just little balls of light. Diminution was one of the 10 fairy powers I created for K&K Fairies, and I wrote a moment into the choices where someone throws an anti-magic grenade at 3 fairies, and since fairies are beings of pure magic, it causes them to lose their physical form, turning them into easily captured wispy things. Brainstorm moment, creature sizes in RPGs. In the current model, D&D has 6 sizes for creatures and objects: tiny, small, medium, large, huge, and gargantuan. Medium creatures are between 4 and 8 feet tall and take up 1 square on the battle grid. Small creatures are 2 to 4 feet and also take up 1 square. Tiny creatures are under 2 feet tall, and you can fit 4 tiny creatures into 1 square. Large creatures are 8 to 16 feet and take up 2 squares by 2 squares on the grid. Huge creatures are 16 to 32 feet and take up a 3 by 3 space. And gargantuan creatures are over 32 feet and take up a space of 4 by 4 squares or possibly more. That's the current model used by 4th and 5th edition D&D, which don't have very many rules related to creature size. 3rd edition and Pathfinder, however, include additional sizes and quite a few rules to go with size. Tiny creatures are specifically between 1 and 2 feet tall, and there are also diminutive creatures, which are between 6 inches and 1 foot and take up 1/25th of a square on the grid, and fine creatures, which is any creature less than 6 inches, which take up 1/100th of a square. And then on the other end, gargantuan creatures max out at 64 feet, and any creature bigger than that is colossal, taking up a 6 by 6 square or possibly more. Things are very symmetrical that way, as it means there are 4 sizes bigger than medium and 4 sizes smaller than medium. Now, long ago, when I was first thinking about designing a fantasy RPG of my own, I thought about adding in more sizes, as I just love horrifyingly massive monstrosities. I called these 3 new sizes Amazing, Unbelievable, and Impossible. Continuing from the logical progression established by the previous sizes, a creature over 128 feet tall would be amazing sized and take up an 8 by 8 space. A creature over 256 feet tall would be unbelievable sized and take up a 10 by 10 space. And a creature over 512 feet tall would be impossible sized and take up a 12 by 12 space. Impossible sized gaming miniatures would be really fucking expensive. On the other hand, 5th edition has a rule that the hit dice on a monster are determined by its size, with tiny creatures getting D4s, small creatures getting D6s, medium D8, large D10, and huge D12, and gargantuan D20. I do like that rule, so maybe I'll go with a 5th edition standard after all. It's just that, as I've said many times before, I want Keys and Kingdoms to have a lot more rules influenced by creature size, with diminutive adventurers and colossus climbs, and in my mind, tiny isn't small enough and gargantuan isn't big enough. This is kind of turning into the #1 priority of Keys and Kingdoms rules. It comes up in nearly every movie. But needing to hire a real game designer is good for my ambition, as one of the people I dream of working with in the future is Rob Heinzu, one of the lead designers of 4th edition D&D and co-creator of 13th Age. He's a cousin to my aunt's best friend, and in fact, on one occasion when visiting his cousin, he stayed in my room. I wasn't there, I didn't meet him, but he stayed in the same room where at the time I was keeping my massive collection of 4th edition books, and he signed 2 of them. The reason I know 13th Age exists is that before that, my aunt used that connection to get me a copy of the game book signed by both creators. So, yeah, this is the kind of thing that would require expanding TAPAS and Stuff Productions a bit first, but maybe my tenuous connection to Rob Heinzu is the key to getting the Keys and Kingdoms tabletop game created. Anyway, back to Sleeping Beauty. In the original fairy tale, the kingdom sleeps for 100 years before a prince, who had no prior connection to any of the events, found the Sleeping Beauty and awakened her. Well, knocked her up so she gave birth to a baby who subsequently woke her up by sucking the spindle out of her finger to awaken her, but details. The movie alludes to this feature of the tale by having Maleficent promise to free Philip from her dungeon in 100 years' time when he's fucking old. Deliciously evil. Flora gifts Philip with a sword of truth and a shield of virtue. We never find out why they're called that, but methinks they'd make for good magic items in an RPG, no? The Forest of Thorns, the dragon transformation, this is epic stuff, as in Maleficent is clearly an epic-level sorceress. Now, of course, she turns into a black dragon, which would breathe acid, not fire, but I figure the acid is about the same color as the fire that Dragon Maleficent spits, so there you go. Her dragon form has tiny wings, though, presumably decorative. In Birth by Sleep, she can actually fly on them, and it looks really weird and unconvincing. Maleficent calls her powers all the powers of hell. When it comes to saying the H word, Maleficent would be the only Disney animated character to utter that word until the 2nd episode of Gargoyles, so hell, she's in good company. I've seen a few cartoons and comics, such as the Kingdom Hearts manga, and I think maybe House of Mouse, where Maleficent could speak in her dragon form, and that didn't sit right with me, but on this viewing, I realized that you hear the dragon laugh and scream in Maleficent's voice, so hey, maybe she can talk in that form and just chose not to. And besides, if Mal is a K&K fairy turning into a K&K dragon, which is based on a D&D dragon, which can totally talk, once again, there you go. And when Philip kills Maleficent, there's nothing left but a smudge upon the earth, smudging things up. If fairies are turned into wisps when subjected to an anti-magic field, then perhaps when they get killed, there's similarly nothing left of them but a smudge. It should be a smudge rather than nothing, because they should leave behind some trace that can be carried around and resurrected, same as any fallen RPG hero. And the film ends with Phil and Aurora dancing on a cloud, a piece of romantic imagery that Walt had hoped to use in several previous films and finally found a good place for it. Moving right along to Darby O'Gale and the Little People. Going in, I knew little else than that this was a film about leprechauns, so I immediately decided to canonize leprechauns in Keys and Kingdoms, figuring they'd fit right in with another race of beings I've been meaning to add: gnomes. Gnomes are a bit weird in RPGs. One of the main core races, gnomes are the only ones that don't come straight out of Tolkien, and most writers and players don't know what to do with them, generally just depicting them as an inconsistent combination of dwarves and halflings, just quirkier. Keys and Kingdoms gnomes will be based on lawn gnomes and be of a scale with pixies. As I made dwarves small, I rule that gnomes are tiny, or perhaps diminutive if I'm going with that. Remember, teeny tiny adventurers are a priority, so leprechauns, I think, should be fey creatures, also at a scale with pixies, as they are in this film, which depicts them as a little over a foot tall. The opening credits feature a letter from Walt Disney thanking the leprechauns and their king for allowing him to depict them in the film. That's cute. We open in an Irish village full of truly awful fake Irish accents, or possibly the most authentic Irish accents ever committed to film. I don't know the difference. I don't actually know what real Irish people sound like. Most media depictions of Irish folks give him this voice, a Scottish accent with a wee bit of a sing-song tone to it, which real Irish people will tell you only leprechauns talk like. I've heard real Irish accents, and they're just about impossible to nail down if you're not actually Irish. We first meet Katie, a cheerful Irish lass and the daughter of our protagonist, Darby O'Gill, who's popular at the pub for telling fanciful stories about his encounters with Brian, king of the leprechauns. He explains that he came upon Brian one night, and Brian offered him 3 wishes for his life. Darby wished for his own health, a good crop of potatoes this year, and the ever-popular pot of gold. Brian tricks him into making a 4th wish, which invalidates his previous 3 wishes. Immediately it becomes clear that the effects in this film are top-notch, with the foot-tall Brian and the human-sized Darby coexisting on screen seamlessly. Our antagonists are the local bully and letter carrier, the oddly named Pony Sugru, and his mother Sheila, who wants Pony to have Darby's job as the groundskeeper of the local nobleman, Lord Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick, as it turns out, has already hired on a man to replace Darby, a young and handsome city boy named Michael, played by Sean Connery, if you can believe that. Fitzpatrick gives Darby 2 weeks to train up Michael and move out of the gatehouse, giving him and Katie a free cottage for their 20 years of loyal service. Michael and Katie are instantly attracted to each other. That night, Darby's horse Cleopatra escapes, and he pursues her up to Knocknashika, the ancient ruins on a hilltop near the village. In a twofer of the worst effects in the film, Cleopatra turns into some kind of ghost horse and knocks Darby into a well, where the leprechauns find him and bring him to King Brian. Turns out Darby's fanciful stories are true, and he has a storied history with Brian. Brian talks about the artifacts he's collected over the 5,000 years of his life, and tells Darby he can never leave. It turns out the leprechauns overheard that Darby is losing his job, and lured him to their kingdom as a favor to him. He's not crazy about this idea, as he wants to go back to his daughter. There's a dance scene where Darby plays the fiddle faster and faster to get the leprechauns all hyped up for a fox hunt, which is apparently one of the 3 things leprechauns can't resist. The leprechauns rush off, return on teeny tiny horses, note that, teeny tiny horses, and go off on the hunt. Darby sneaks out the back once he's alone, though due to a hole in his pocket he fails to steal any of the leprechaun's treasure. Once Darby is back home, Brian finds him and confronts him. Darby gets him drunk to hold him until dawn, as leprechaun magic apparently doesn't work during the day. Darby sets his cat on Brian until Brian offers another 3 wishes. Brian briefly offers infinite wishes, but Darby remembers the rule about making a 4th wish. Darby's first wish is for Brian to remain by his side for the next fortnight so that he has time to think over his other 2 wishes. Just to make sure this wish doesn't go awry, he carries Brian around in a sack everywhere he goes. Wish-making is a feature in D&D, not one that dungeon masters are especially fond of, as a wish can severely derail the adventure plan. I've already made a lot of plans for wish-granting genies in Keys and Kingdoms, for obvious reasons. So I think based on this film, I ought to give leprechauns similar capabilities. Might as well go with this film's rules, why not? Katie and Michael have some semblance of relationship development, she inviting him out to a dance. Darby does some digging to see what Katie wants so that he can figure out what to wish for, but it seems she's satisfied with her life and wants nothing. So Darby just goes off on a job he offered to take for the local priest, Father Murphy, to fetch a new church bell from a nearby village. Michael sings a little song. Sean Connery's singing double isn't a very good singer, and Connery isn't very good at lip-syncing. Darby tells everyone at the pub what he's got in the bag, but doesn't show Brian to them. He does, however, give Brian a drink. Brian drinks it and tosses the glass back out, which convinces everyone at the pub that Darby is being truthful. Katie sings a little song. Her singing double isn't a very good singer, and the actress isn't very good at lip-syncing. That night, Michael, guarding Lord Fitzpatrick's property against rabbit poachers, comes upon Darby with his sack and assumes Darby is the one poaching rabbits. Darby opens the sack to show Michael, but Brian shapeshifts himself into a rabbit. Darby accidentally makes his second wish for Michael to be able to see Brian, which he can, still in the form of a rabbit. So Darby gets doubly cheated out of that wish. Meanwhile, Katie is at the dance to which she invited Michael. He turned her down so he could be on poacher watch, so Katie instead goes with a fellow named Sean, but Pony intimidates Sean into letting him take Katie home. Brian and Darby continue to butt heads, Darby insisting that he won't make his 3rd wish until Katie is happy, or some such. I don't really get what it is he's waiting for. For Katie to have something to wish for, I guess? I don't know. Brian visits Michael and Katie while they sleep in order to persuade them, as they dream, to hook up with each other. The next morning, the young lovebirds go to Knocknashiga and steal a kiss while Darby and Brian watch. Darby wants to save his wish for the next day, as today is Sunday. I guess the logic is he doesn't want to dabble in fey magic on the holy day, or some such. But on Monday, the mail arrives, and Sheila finds a postcard from Lord Fitzpatrick to Michael, which reveals to her that Michael is being trained to be Darby's replacement, which Darby knows but decided to keep hidden from Katie. Pony gives the card to Katie, who is enraged. Darby is in the pub, ready to make his final wish in front of everyone in town. Darby points out how savvy he usually is about wishes. When one of his friends says he'd wish for a big mansion, Darby points out that he neglected to wish for servants and the money for upkeep, so his wish would backfire on him. Katie comes in, distraught and begging her father to give up on his delusions, knocking over the bag and allowing Brian to escape in the form of a rabbit. That night, Cleopatra escapes again, and Katie goes out to fetch her. Michael tries to go help her, but Pony knocks him out and sets him up so it looks like he passed out drunk. Darby says that Katie is chasing a puka. Apparently, that's the ghost thing that Cleopatra turned into. In D&D, a puka is an 18-inch tall fey creature that's basically a sexy bunny. I like that D&D creature. I want to keep them as they are. And of course, in reality, a puka is me and Natty. Hee hee. Darby also hears the wailing of the banshee, the same creature he heard on the night Katie's mother died. That would have been a nice thing to tell the audience before the climax of the film, but okay. So banshees, in D&D they're undead, a type of ghost, but I believe in Irish mythology they're more akin to a fey spirit than an undead spirit. In Gargoyles, the banshee is one of the children of Oberon. I think I'll go with banshees as undead, while will-o'-the-wisps are fey. The banshee appears as a hooded, ghostly woman with long, spidery fingers, and first appears combing her own hair. Darby gets rid of the banshee by throwing a lantern at her, and brings the unconscious Katie back home, where she's sick with a fever. The banshee starts wailing again, though, and Darby finds her right outside his front door, along with the approaching death coach. Darby calls for Brian, so he can make his third wish. Now, Brian can't break the rules that the death coach has to leave with someone, so Darby wishes to take Katie's place. The driver of the death coach has no head, so like a combination of the coachman and the headless horseman, both of whom I've made into Keys and Kingdoms creatures, so let's see. I'll think about that. Some sort of psychopomp, grim reaper thingy. Brian takes the coach with Darby, just to keep him company, calling him a worthy adversary and promising that Katie will be okay. Brian says, "I wish I could go with you all the way," and Darby replies, "I wish you could too." Brian laughs. Darby has inadvertently made a fourth wish, making his first three null and void, and his only wish that had any lasting consequences was the one to take Katie's place on the death coach. So, Darby tumbles out of the death coach and back into the world of the living. Later, Darby is at the pub telling the story of his experience with death. Pony doesn't believe him, but Michael comes in, assuring Pony that he believes Darby. Michael brawls with Pony and wins, and Michael and Darby leave together. Katie is just fine, and the movie ends as the trio head off to work, singing together. So that was a fun movie. Unexceptional, but I enjoy it, and, the Irish mythical aspects are good for Keys and Kingdoms. And now, a recap of what I made Keys and Kingdoms canon based on what I saw in the package era films. From Saludos Amigos, I pondered living flight towers and living mountains, and as with most of these films, I pondered the variety of natives that might exist. From The Three Caballeros, I thought of a setting with canals instead of streets, shrinking and growing mechanics to go with the Colossus mechanics in the tiny-sized adventures, and reminded myself of adult content such as smoking and firearms. Not that I needed the reminder, as there's a lot of drinking, swearing, and sex in the choices. All I really got out of Make Mine Music was sentient magical hats, which, funnily enough, was an idea I kind of already implemented in one future Keys and Kingdoms story. From Song of the South, I got, well, nothing really. So that's a point against releasing it for its historical value. Maybe it's just not that special. From Fun and Fancy Free, I thought of magic sentient harps, magic beans and beanstalks, worlds in the clouds, and giants, possibly shape-shifting giants, and more giant bugs. From Melody Time, I thought of horse-drawn sleds for wintertime travel, as well as outlandish tales of how geographical features came to be. And finally, from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, I pondered how to deal with D&D monsters that are essentially anthropomorphic animals in a world where natives exist. My idea was to make them look more monstrous than just anthro-animals. Well, Natty suggested perhaps they all have origins of coming from natives, which I was into. I thought of eccentric rich guys in their homes, modern vehicles and their car-forged counterparts, and some sort of legendary revenant based on the Headless Horseman. So that's it for me this week, folks. Whew. With all the work I've been doing at my dang old job, I fell way behind on my usual podcast schedule. The podcast was supposed to be released on Tuesday, March 26th, but that's when I finished writing it. I'm recording this the following morning and hoping I can finish editing, usually a process of several days, all in a day, so the podcast is only one day late. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week for whatever's going on then.